Welcome to our webinar, AAC On The Move, Integrating Communication Supports into Physical Activities. Part 1 of this presentation will be an overview of communication supports. Part 2 will focus on showing specific examples of the different types of supports. Let's start with a quick introduction to our topic so that we have a shared understanding of what we are talking about. Communication supports. What are they? The term communication supports can reflect a broad range of materials used for many different purposes. We will include in our definition two types of materials. The first type is a visual support that is used to enhance the partner's spoken input. So I'm adding a visual element to something that I'm saying. The second type of support is made available to supplement a student or client's expression. So a communication app or a communication board would be an example of that second type. When we think about who we would use these supports with, we want to cast a pretty wide net. We encourage using communication supports if you think it might improve a person's understanding or expression. Certainly if we are aware already of a significant comprehension or expressive challenge, then it's even more important to incorporate communication supports into our physical activity time. One of the things that we know is that speaking, that's a motor activity. Small motors of the mouth, motions of the mouth and the muscles of the mouth and the articulators, etc. So oftentimes folks that have trouble with those muscles have trouble with other muscles. So it kind of goes hand in hand that individuals who have trouble with speaking, you're going to see that in other areas. So they may be receiving physical therapy, occupational therapy, etc. And so there's a high chance that you'll run into individuals that have challenges across areas. And that's part of why we're providing this webinar specifically on this topic. As we talk about the communication supports, the implementation guidelines are going to apply across a range of settings. So we're talking about educational settings or medical settings, in the community or in the home, anywhere that communication happens, we can incorporate these communication supports. And although we know that there are different contexts that are associated with physical activities, what we'd like to do is focus on examples of contexts that are the most meaningful applications. So rather than looking at some isolated skills addressed in isolated settings, we're going to encourage thinking about applying the skills in the context where they're needed. So in the classroom, in the bathroom, in the playground, at the store, in the kitchen, etc. Okay, so let's look at some examples of communication supports just so that you have your own visual reference as we talk about application. And again, you'll get many more examples in webinar number 2. Here we have a basic communication display. This is specifically around some physical activities, so it's more like a topic board. And you might use something like this when you're speaking to the person who needs this for expression or to aid in understanding what you're asking them to do. So you may use it, and then your student or your client may use it as well to express themselves. Here we have a mini schedule or a task sequence, and this type of visual support can be useful to define expectations or to organize a period of time and to act as a general visual reminder. This last example is a general visual support for self-regulation, and it's intended to remind the child of what their options are when they feel like they're upset. This takes information that the adult has and it puts it into a format that the child can access, so it increases their independence. So I could say these same things, but it's much more beneficial to provide that in a format that the person can access themselves. Okay, so now that we've seen a couple of examples, let's talk about why and how we use these communication supports. So we're going to use these 5 categories to organize the information from here on in the webinar. We'll first look at the intended outcomes of using the supports, and then how and where we implement them. We'll discuss the features of the materials themselves, how we know that they're working, and lastly, what type of preparation is required. So let's start right in with the intended outcomes. What are we trying to achieve with the use of the communication supports during these physical activities? So here we are, we're engaged in tasks which are going to range from those that have very high physical demands, so things that are really physically taxing to the person, to those that have minimal physical demands, but still some. And now we're looking to add these other materials in. We want to really understand and appreciate why it's so important to do that. So first, let's think about what the benefits are for you as the adult partner or say a therapist or an instructor. To start, you are actively sharing in the responsibility for implementing a cohesive program for that individual when you adopt something that's outside of the realm of your personal focus. So just as you hope that good motor habits are supported when you're not present, you want to offer that same consistency around communication. So incorporating these communication supports is part of implementing a discipline-free program. Second, creating and using the supports can really improve the specificity and clarity of your instruction. So when you have to define what goes into that mini schedule, or when you're adding symbols to your speech, you really need to be really focused and clear. And ultimately, this can help improve your own instruction because it gives you that kind of thinking and preparation and organization. Third, some of the supports are going to provide an opportunity for you to obtain more input and participation from your student or client. So helping to set up a task list, they can choose the order of the tasks that they want to do. They can make choices from a choice board. They can maybe use a rating scale to tell you how they're feeling or how much they like something or don't like something. Overall, you really open up more chances for dialogue when you use those supports. Ironically, you can also decrease some of the challenging behavior or personal expression, if you will, because the supports become the focus of the information rather than you. So a student may be less likely to react to information that's presented in a more objective way through a visual support than if that same information were to be presented verbally by an adult. So rather than say, oh, you have to leave this activity, you've got a little countdown, and the countdown says it's time to leave the activity, not the adult. So they may be less likely to resist. Lastly, the more you use the supports, the better you're going to get at them. So then you might find yourself expanding to using different supports or using them more often or using them with more individuals, and that's just going to make you a better practitioner. So now let's look at some of the benefits for the person that you're working with. First, having something to supplement auditory information is a huge help for anyone, right? So we know this because we write notes to ourselves and we record appointments and we have calendars and lists, etc. So visual supports help us by allowing us to reference them for information and not having to keep that information accessible in our brains. In short, we are able to use recognition memory rather than recall memory, and so the same stands for our students and clients. Sometimes the visuals are also really critical to enhance comprehension or understanding of information or expectations. So adding words or graphics or some sort of structure can help us to make sense out of what is being said or out of a situation. Allowing individuals to make choices, exert appropriate control, and give feedback are great ways of practicing self-determination skills. And that set of skills is maybe one of the most important sets that we can teach. So if you can incorporate that through the visual supports, that's a really concrete way to achieve that. And for students who rely on visuals to support their expressive communication, so they're using that communication app or that communication book, it is so important that they observe others using their systems to communicate. Um, if you can be one more adult in their life that talks and points to pictures, you are really modeling acceptance, and you're also teaching how to use that support appropriately in different contexts. Okay, so let's move on from why we do it to what we're doing. So how should we use the communication supports? To start, I want to point out that there are some specific guidelines for some specific supports that can be found in the resources section. There's some links there. So here I'll go over some of the general rules. First, if you're using the visuals to increase comprehension, you want to pair your speech with the visual. So if I wanted to say wait, I might show the symbol wait and then say wait. In cases where you're trying to increase independence, say for a child completing a task, you would just use the visual support and let them do that and follow the visual once they've learned it, and then they can interact with you. So depending on the purpose of the tool, in one case you want to add the speech to it, and then another case you want to fade that away and work toward independence. Regardless, you want to really focus on the key words for the situation. So in that example about waiting, you don't need to have symbols for I want you to wait. You know, what's the critical element? It's about the one word wait. Along with that, you want to choose flexible vocabulary as much as possible, which tends to be more verbs or descriptors or time words as opposed to very specific words like nouns. So if you're not familiar with the concept of core vocabulary, there's another reference in the resources section for that discusses that process of selecting vocabulary based on frequency of use and flexibility. But in general, choose those non-noun words as much as possible to use in your systems, because you can use them more often and more flexibly. For instance, if you were reading a book, choose the word read as opposed to book, or even the name of the book, which is very specific, because read can be used for a worksheet, it can be used for the computer, it can be used for lots of different things, whereas book, or certainly the name of the book, are much more specific. So we also want to teach individuals what the symbols mean and how to use this support by doing it. So they learn when they see you do it. And so if you want to teach the individual how to use a particular system or what a word means, you go ahead and do it. And then shifting into our next point, don't require performance with the support. So you can provide them as an option, you can provide them as a resource, but you don't want to get into a power struggle where you're saying you must use this, you must reference this. If it's useful, if it's well done, if it provides information, it will be used. So just give it the time to do that. So let's see, and lastly, you want to be consistent. So don't give up because, oh, quote, it doesn't work, or I'm not sure if it's helping. Sometimes we do need to tweak the format or the application, but more often than not, we just need to keep at it. And sometimes people have different ways of attending, and you don't know that what you're doing is helpful until it isn't there. A number of years ago, I worked with a student who was using a communication display and creating sentences. It was a pretty robust display, and he was using it to create sentences. And one of the healthcare workers that was working with him felt that he didn't need it, and that he could speak and not use that. And as soon as she removed it, he was not able to perform the same speaking in sentences, because he used that to help him with organizing the words and getting them in the right order. And even though it didn't look like he was referencing it, he actually was, and it helped him to be more competent and do that. So as soon as we provided the support again, he was able to create those sentences. So just a reminder that sometimes we don't know in what ways supports are being used, and they're still helpful. Okay, so let's talk about some of the materials that would be considered communication supports. Here are some of the supports, the names that you might be familiar with. Um, the first section is those are commonly used for receptive or input or supporting understanding tools for that purpose. And then the ones towards the bottom, the choice boards and talkback boards and communication displays, etc., those are often associated with tools that are created specifically to help someone who needs help in expression. So they're struggling to have their speech meet their needs, so they would use one of these tools, or usually more than one, to help express themselves. Even though the intention is that it supplements their speech for communication, it is appropriate and even encouraged for adults to use those same supports. As we had said before, anytime someone can see you doing what they need to be doing, it's a great learning opportunity, and you can show how those tools can be applied in your situation, as well as them seeing it happen in other more structured situations. Okay, so let's look at some of the features of the supports. What makes a good tool or a good communication support? Well, first and foremost, it has to be there, right? So making sure that the supports are present wherever the person is that needs it is critical. And then that's part of why we have a whole other webinar on the tools. Is there are so many different formats that you can use to help make sure that that tool is available when and where you need it. Make sure that the materials are clear, that they're visible, they have legible graphics, they're not crumpled, they're not tiny, good size of text, good clear images, use colors. Lots of those things go a long way towards making the support accessible. You can use really a variety of representations depending on your audience and your purpose, but that might include photos, line drawings, text. Sometimes a support is going to be needed by an individual, such as their own communication app or display, and then other times you can create a support that can be shared across folks, such as a group schedule, etc. So this is one of the reasons why you would maybe need multiple formats. But again, to save time in creating and learning, try to make the materials using vocabulary that's flexible and formats that are flexible so that you can use them across activities. Don't make them so specific that it's a one and done. But overall, you can expect to have many different supports based on your purpose and your context. And again, look to webinar 2 to see lots of examples, so that if you're struggling with how to integrate it into your busy activities, you see lots of examples that make them really portable and really user-friendly. Okay, we have 2 more sections left. The second to last section is around how do we know if this is effective? So how do we know if what we're doing is successful? I said earlier that you sometimes don't know if what you're doing is working, but you shouldn't stop. So here are some of the things that you might see that are good indicators that the supports are effective. You can see increased visual attention to support. So initially the person wasn't looking at all, and now they're taking sneaky peeks and glancing over, or they're actually looking actively. You may see a reduction in challenging behavior. So when you didn't have that task sequence out, you might see lots of problems, and now you show what's happening now and next and after that, and you don't see as many challenging behaviors. You might see the person look at a visual and immediately begin to do what's depicted, and so that means they've learned what that represents, and they don't need the speech added per se in order to understand that. That shows that they're getting information from that support, which is one of the goals. You might see them initiate, so they begin to use a support that previously you had been doing lots of modeling with, and they had been doing lots of watching. They're more independent, so you had to help with certain things, and now they're doing them on their own. You'd see a decrease in behaviors that you might associate with anxiety. So whatever you've observed in that particular person that you would say is, boy, this shows that they're really anxious or upset. You might see a decrease in that. And then you might also see that their performance is more accurate. So whatever tasks they're doing, they're making fewer mistakes because they're more clear on the expectations. So these are just a few of the ways that we know if what we're doing is working. And they're subtle because this is sort of like it's a cognitive kind of support, right? It's helping in an internal way. And so we have to kind of look for those subtle differences. Okay, our last section is around the prep and planning. So it has to do with what are our action steps. So if we want to get started with implementing communication supports, what do we do? Well, start by defining just one activity, one potential target activity where you think, I think this particular activity or time frame would benefit from a visual support. And then identify your purpose. So what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to share information? Are you trying to show a sequence of events or steps? Or think about some of those different tools that we represented, and also look in the resources for the different types of tools, and that will help you with those purposes as well. So what do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? Make those decisions. And then select the vocabulary or content that you want to represent, because depending on what words you're representing or the different type of information, that will inform the format of your support. So is this something that is going to be on the wall? Is it going to be portable? Is it going to be small? Is it going to have a lot of information? Those are all decisions that you would want to make based on what you're trying to achieve. So then you do select that tool that you think is the best match to the situation, and you either create it or you obtain it. If it's something you can download, do that. If it's something that you have to make, try and make that as simple as possible. There is a support in the resources section of some general communication symbols that you could start with if they fit your situation, but try and make the process as streamlined as possible, because you may start off with great energy, but then you don't want to do this again, right, the next time. And then lastly, want to write out a brief description about what to do with the support. So even if it's just on the back or next to it, just write out like what are you going to say, what do you expect to have happen as a result, or what's the purpose. Just kind of write out what your intention is, and maybe it's kind of the information from above about the purpose, etc., and then how to use it, particularly if more than one person's going to use it. So for instance, here's a schedule, and what you want to do is say, oh, it's time for, and name what's in the first column, and then when it's over, you say this and such is over, and you move it to the second column, and then you keep going through that process. So that's for your first support, and the last step would be to repeat that process. Once you get moving and you feel comfortable and you feel like this has been successful, go back to the beginning and start again, and do the same thing for another purpose or another activity. Okay, so lastly, along with this video, we will post some links to some handouts that talk about the different types of visual supports or communication supports, the rationale for those, some step-by-step instructions for implementation of different supports. There'll be a PDF of this PowerPoint, and then also links to the core vocabulary webinar, which I referenced. So I do hope that you'll join us for part 2, which will contain all the examples, and thank you for your time. Also, if you are looking for certification to show that you attended, certificate of attendance to this webinar, there will be a link posted along with the video as well for you to obtain that. Thank you.